We had a phenomenal conversation with Njoku, and I think it was fun because I've only been able to interact with him from a social watching perspective. So this was my first opportunity to be able to learn a bit more about his history, his experience, both from just starting out as an intern and now he's building multiple products simultaneously. I think that is a pretty cool, fascinating thing. I know you've had more hands-on experience and interaction with him for a much longer period of time. So what can you share about, how the conversation went? What did you think of it?
I have watched videos of Njoku being interviewed in the past, and this is quite different for me in terms of he's building up different patterns from early experiences he's had, lessons he's learned, and it's just super insightful. It's a gold mine of many lessons from building in public to dealing with depression and his own relationship with himself, pivoting. And he talked about the pivot hell, which is a very interesting way of framing it. And I just really enjoyed his openness of sharing why he's building, what he's building for, what his personal mission is, and where his company sits in that. And the evolution of also building in areas that interface with the old economy and the on-chain economy, and now building fully on-chain economy, and a few things of what we should expect with his new project, Liquid. A super fascinating guy. His many thousands of people follow him and look up to him as a developer and as a founder. So it's super exciting just to see him continue to be vulnerable in himself as he keeps building.
100%. I do recall the first time I reported about LaserPay was actually when it was shutting down. That was back when I was doing a different podcast. So I remember very clearly when it all happened. It's been interesting as well to see just the general growth, those different insights that one is able to get while you're in the trenches and you're building in this, because you're shoved into this new world that nobody can quite give you advice on because it's still so new and so nascent. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does, with Super Migrate and Liquid and anything else that he pivots into, if he ever does pivot again. I think all of it just comes from a very important mission, which is to onboard people, but also give them space to exist and do whatever it is that they want to do. So I hope everybody else enjoys it as well.
Yeah, and this is especially super valuable for new builders, startup founders who are getting the company off the ground, and players who are in the space. I think specifically just a lot of useful resources here that is shared that you can get a lot from it.
Yeah. For you, seeing these builders after Magma, what is it like? Because I'm sure there's certain very visible differences that you're able to see from when they arrive there and when they leave and, whatever it is that they're doing outside. What has that been like watching specifically Njoku and the work that he's done since Magma?
So Njoku joined the first cohort of Magma early last year, and then he came back in the second cohort with the spirit of giving back and paying it forward. He said that Magma happened at a very transformative time in his life when he was transitioning, trying to figure out what to work on next, and testing some ideas out there freely and getting feedback. And he came back to the second cohort wanting to kind of create a space and openness to offer that type of support to a bunch of other builders, those who might be in a similar space of transition or otherwise. And so it's just been super fascinating to watch Njoku, keep growing as a builder, as a founder, and the space that he's operating in. And so, I'm a long-term bull on Njoku. And also, his ability to work with so many other builders, kind of encapsulates the whole essence of even why Magma exists, to be that coordination layer, right? And even when he kind of moves out to building completely global protocols like Liquid, he's still deeply grounded in the types of users he's always worked with and he's seen in Nigeria and across Africa, and providing much more sophisticated tools globally that is actually not necessarily available with the existing tools that we have.
I think we will leave the rest for everybody else to just kind of decipher themselves through listening to the podcast. I do hope you enjoy it. It was a ton of fun for us to have that conversation. I do hope, we can have a lot more of these. So let's get into the conversation.
Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the Borderless Pod, where we discover a little bit more about the builders positioning us in the zeitgeist of technology and the borderless ideas that make on-chain the new frontier. If you're yet to do so, I suggest you do follow Borderless AF on X or Twitter and subscribe to the newsletter at borderless.africa. Today, I am accompanied by the founder of Borderless Africa, Yosef Ayele, and our builder guest for today is Emmanuel Njoku. Njoku has been actively working within the dev space since 2018 for first as a game dev intern, then as a front-end and blockchain engineer for the next 5 years with entities like Nestcoin, MakerDAO, to just name a few. That brings us to today, where he is currently building Liquid, which is a collaborative finance platform, and Supermigrate, which, in his words, is the gateway to the superchain. Welcome to the show, both Njoku and Yusuf.
Thank you, Ms. Purple.
Thank you, Ms. Purple. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So we'll just get straight into it. Obviously, Yusuf, you're here in your capacity as Borderless Africa, but also to touch a bit more on Magma, but we'll get into that a bit later. I want to start off with you first, Njoku. When you essentially kicked off your career, the experiments and the work that you had done already before then, and your GitHub essentially served as your proof of work to get you through the door. Was that the intention for your GitHub to serve as that? Was it the end goal, or did you just get lucky in that you were just in the trenches from pretty early on?
Yeah, I think I would say it's basically a bit of both, right? I think first off, I was in school and we had like this break, and there was basically that part of me that didn't want to go back to school. They just wanted to focus on software engineering full time. And then there was the part where I just love building stuff, and I was just deep in the trenches. My GitHub was basically for me just pushing my projects and being able to share it to my friends. And then the other part where I basically need to put out stuff so that when people ask me, what have you built or what have you done? Then I can have a place where they can, go check out the projects I've actually worked on. So that's why I'm like, it was basically a bit of both, right? I was very intentional about building out projects. So I would just contribute to any project as long as it's open source and it will show up in my GitHub profile. And, during COVID, there was a time where I went through this challenge with my friends where the goal was basically to code every single day from, I think, March to September. So if you check 2020 around that time on my GitHub, you'd see that I was pushing code every single day. And the idea was, I was going to code more than 10 hours a day, and not just coding out random stuff, but building actual projects or contributing to actual products. So there was a lot of intentionality, put into that, and it actually paid off. And I loved building stuff. So a combination of both, I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, coding 10 hours a day is not a small feat. That is a lot of hours in a day for somebody to commit. But it sounds like there was a very intended focus there to say that this is generally something that I'm interested in and I'm curious about. Kind of progressing from that to then eventually you ended up creating LaserPay. What was that transition from you just contributing to different things that are maybe just serving specific purposes? And like you said, if they meet your criteria of being open source and they can show up in your GitHub, but how did you then transition from that to eventually becoming a founder and starting LaserPay?
I think I would say that when I was building projects, I was not just a dev that would just sit back and wait for the manager to actually say do stuff, right? I wanted to be involved in every single process. I was just so curious to know how the company actually operates even beyond the engineering side of things. And I think that really, really helped me. Post-COVID, I joined Zen Finance, first as a software developer, and then I went on to lead their blockchain engineering team. I got to that point where I could basically be involved in decisions or involved in meetings where, they're talking about tokenomics or they're talking about OTC or market makers growth strategy. Because when I joined early on, I just, worked really hard to get to the point where the CEO of Zen Finance is anything that has to do with the engineering of Zen Finance, go talk to Njoku. So I was just very intentional about building that relevance. Same thing when I joined MakerDAO. I joined as an integrations engineer, but I joined the BD meetings. So there was a time MakerDAO wanted to get into Africa, increase the distribution of the demand of DAI in Africa. And we had meetings with all of the exchanges in Africa. So I got on all of those calls, right? I could have as well said, just do your meeting when it's time for integration, call me, right? But I specifically asked to be on those calls. And that's how I met Yele. And I then, went on to consult for Nestcoin. Right. And my relationship with Yele, I would say, actually helps me form that business mindset on knowing how to actually run a company or knowing how to build a company. It's I literally watched Yele build Nestcoin because we worked on most of the projects that Nestcoin I I basically sat through like ideation to actually like going live, from like, talking about like GTM, how that impacts like the product direction, to basically launch plan, and to like, pressing that go live button. And then I moved to Dubai sometime in 2021. Got the idea for LaserPay, started working on it. And then I built out an MVP, and then I showed it to, Yele, and I'm like, I actually want to do this full time. And then he's like, yeah, sure. I'm actually going to back you. Next Coin and Yele was actually like my first investors. They invested $50,000 into LaserPay. And then Yele told me something after I made the investment. He said, look, Njoku, building a product is different from building a business. I still think about it till today, right? Building a product, you can basically be involved in a lot of things. You can do everything. But then when you're now about to turn that product into a business, it becomes a whole different scenario. Now you have to like think of hiring, you have to think of regulations, you have to think of like incorporating that company. Before then, I just used to like build my project. I didn't care about incorporation or anything. But now you now have to like start thinking about sort of like boring parts. It's a build that's like very boring for us, right? So you basically have to start thinking about those boring parts. And you now have to like, start thinking about what's the economic model here? How do we actually make money? How do we become a self-sustainable business, right? That's how that will actually affect your product, how to like, shape your product roadmap. So that's, statement from Yele actually like, changed my mindset on how I sort of like, thought about products, and how I also saw business. And then again, like, I also read a lot of books. I always tell people that like the internet is actually like, a gold mine. We are at like, a time where information is actually free. You have a lot of resources. Like there are tons and tons of Harvard and Stanford resources on the internet. Y Combinator has whole startup school. I know that I've actually gone through the Y Combinator like top school. I didn't get into YC, but I just went down there and learned a lot from like, their resources. So I would say that like, the internet is a gold mine. I took like, advantage of that. And I basically like read every single thing I can find on like businesses, on like raising venture fund, on like building a team and like building products. That's literally like, how I transitioned. Yeah.
It must be a total journey from being an open source developer, building your GitHub profile, to working with Zen Finance and MakerDAO. Even those protocols, many builders across the continent, they look at it as something that's just so far away, right? And being able to get involved and learn a ton and contribute, and then find someone like Yele, and many people can find other builders around them to learn a lot from. I think you kind of chose a very interesting path and direction. And so if we move to LaserPay, just tell us a little bit about where you had the urge to go build a company as a developer yourself, and doing a lot of these things for the first time. There's sort of theory and then there's practice, right? And what have been the experiences of actually building something like that and kind of getting it to where it wants to go?
Yeah, I mean, LaserPay was actually like a very interesting one. I saw stuff online where people said I was like, a lesson worth $1 million. But yeah, I never thought it would become a company. I never thought it would become a business, right? But I've always wanted to like actually build stuff that people will use. And I'm someone that usually have lots of ideas, and I always want to build out those ideas. Fortunately, some of those ideas eventually become companies. So that's not something that I usually like, plan for. Things you read will actually help you, but then building the company itself is just a different ball game. At LaserPay, we had a product that, people actually loved, people were actually using. We had merchants integrate like our payments gateway. And then we went on to raise money. I didn't plan on raising money. It was not the plan. But then when Yele wrote us like the first check, we're like, oh, okay. So we can actually raise money and then like, scale this company, and the company will actually become like, 10x. We'll build this $1 billion company.
Right.
So I was so excited. We went on to like, raise 400K initially, and there was a lot of money in the bank. So we felt like we could do everything. We felt so powerful. Went on to actually like hire more folks. We are like, okay, we need to accelerate our roadmap. Let's hire more engineers. We did all of that. Again, there was the business model there, which was good. but we hadn't like tested it out fully, right? To a point where we are like, okay, this is now reaching that tipping point and we don't have enough resources to actually keep up with the demand we're actually getting for the products, right? We didn't think of that. So we just went on to hire more people. And because I always have a lot of ideas, right? I'm like, okay, can we actually build this out? We literally went from just like Abdul, Justice and Prosper, the four of us, to having like, over 25 people in 3 months, right? That was absolute chaos. No one actually prepared me for that. Getting to manage a team of that size, I have to literally learn on the job, right? I have to also deal with investors, with business partners. And then it hits me that we actually need a license to do XYZ. We need a license to actually do payouts, right? And we are incorporated in the US, but it might not be the best place to actually have incorporated this business. Okay, we need to actually incorporate in Dubai, or we need to incorporate in Canada and get a money service business license, or we need to move to the BVI, right? If we want to launch a token. So there were just all of these things popping up at literally the same time. It was mass chaos, 100x chaos. Increasing the number of people we had sort of gave us the illusion that we're doing well or we're growing. But in reality, it slowed us down drastically. I would say that when we're actually four of us in a room, we shipped the most products. That was when we actually did our best work at LaserPay, right? We just say, okay, we actually need to do this. Everybody heads down doing it, right? I would say that us not having a plan for the number of people that were actually coming in was actually a big disaster.
No, and that's just a lesson that many founders learn the hard way, right? And it's a lifelong lesson. When did you realize that was the case, that you had actually brought in too many people?
I think I realized 1 year later. We got in more capital. We had a COO, someone the traditional business experience. But then again, I just kept on comparing the rate at which we used to ship products, sort of rate at which we're currently shipping product at the time, right? And the difference was actually really massive. Having a lot of people give you this solution, and it also sort of distracts you, right? Because again, you're focused on this thing, and then because you have 20 people, and you're like, yo, these guys are just sitting down, doing little to nothing. Can we add more things on the roadmap and get them to work? When you notice all of these things in your business, the minute you realize it, you need to actually do something about it ASAP. If it's to lay off people, you need to do it ASAP. Anything that you have to do to sort of course correct, you don't sleep on it. Don't take 3 months deciding. You actually need to make those hard decisions really, really quickly. And that's something that we didn't do at LaserPay.
And that's painful because you've brought those people in and you're working together.
Exactly.
And you know them.
Yeah.
Right. And being a CEO of a company, you're balancing the needs of the business as well as the needs of the people around you.
Exactly. And most times they align. Yeah.
Yeah. And most things they align, but sometimes they're not. And so you got to make some of those tough choices.
And also, right, regards to tough choices as well, there were times where we realized that, okay, the Nigerian regulatory environment is causing a strain on the business. We need to get into another market ASAP. Making those kind of decisions really quickly. There are also times where you'd be like, okay, since the regulatory environment in Nigeria or in most parts of Africa are basically making it very tough for the business to run, how about, you pivot into something very similar, or just even pivoting your GTM or your use case or your target customers, right? But then it took us a lot of time, right? I think I was scared of pivoting. And now I'm I don't really care. Right? If I've sort of exhausted all of my hypotheses and all of the theories that I had, and what is happening in reality is not matching my theory or hypothesis, I'm literally going to just, okay, guys, what can we do next? How can we actually make this work? Do we need to tweak the product? Do we need to change the messaging or the narrative around the product? So now I'm no longer scared to do all of those, but I was really scared of pivots, and I was like, oh my God, what will people say? We are moving away from the core vision, the core mission of LaserPay.
That actually makes me think of a tweet that I think you made recently about how as a founder, you tend to end up in this, I think you called it pivot hell. So how do you keep track with that pivoting that you may have to keep doing every time to make sure that you're moving forward, but you're still serving the purpose that you intended to serve, even if they aren't people that you're working with? I'm sure there's a reason why you created Super Migrate and Liquid, right? I mean, you can change it in multiple ways. I mean, we know a lot of companies that are not doing what they were doing initially in the beginning, but as long as at the very least it still serves some kind of a useful purpose. So how do you as a founder keep yourself in line with what are my core values here and how far am I willing to turn this thing, but also making sure that it still serves, whatever it is that I'm hoping to serve, or maybe keep in line with the values that you may have yourself?
Yeah. I would say that, yeah, pivot hell is terrible. It's depressing as well. I don't prefer anyone to like get into pivot hell because if you get in there, a lot of people just get in and they never come out, right? If you're also building in public, it's worse because you talk about like, everything that you build. So people will actually see you go crazy in real time. People will see you spiral in real time and go from point A to point B to point C, go back to point B and go back to point A. But then I think everyone that has actually built something would know that that's one of the things that comes with building anything at all. You're going to act like it's going to take a lot of figuring out stuff. It's going to take a lot of bouncing and testing waters here and there to actually see something that clicks. But then the good thing about all of that is that you can do all of that while staying true to your mission. So that's why you've seen a problem and you sort of like craft like, a mission and it's like, oh, it's my life's mission or, it's my mission for like the next 3 to 5 years to actually see that like, DeFi yield or centralized finance in general is accessible to everyone. What I've basically done is that like you sort of like giving yourself a canvas, like a blank canvas where I've crafted that mission. I can then like go ahead to tweak the products. It doesn't necessarily have to be similar offerings, but you'd see that like every product that comes out of Liquid is always going to be tied towards like democratizing access like DeFi yields, right? So again, pivoting doesn't necessarily have to be you changing your entire mission or you were building a house before, you were building a car before, now you want to build computers. Maybe you just need to like build that car differently. Maybe you need to change the engine you're using for the cars. Maybe you need to the colors or you need to do something to it, right? But then what you're still building is a car, you're not pivoting entirely to computers. So I would say that sort of helps if you get into pivot hell is staying true to your mission. And that's why it has to be personal to you. Having a solid mission, internalizing that mission, knowing what that mission actually means to you, right, would actually help you when you get into pivot hell to also help you get out of it.
Yeah. You had a different kind of pivot, I think, with LaserPay and now Super Migrate and Liquid, where LaserPay was more focused on a very specific region of people. It was more Africa focused for the most part. You've pivoted now to it being super global in very many ways. LaserPay was still, able to kind of impact a lot more people, but Super Migrate and Liquid don't seem to be segregated within a specific region of people. How do you approach something like that, something like building in public, because you were very public about the ideas that you had, like you seem to be very comfortable with that, but how do you navigate a situation like that where now it's not just considering the regulation of one country or one region, you have to consider now the whole world, that everybody who's going to try to interact with this will come from a different region that has different understanding or different approach or different openness to the specific space that you're building in? Are there specific things perhaps that you feel like you need to focus on there?
I made the decision that I was sort of like going to be building products that everyone can actually use, no matter where you're from. And I think that's the beauty of the whole on-chain economy. Right? You're not tied to borders or boundaries, right? Literally, anyone anywhere in the world should actually be able to benefit from your products or benefit from what your product has to offer, right? So I think I would say that I have my own personal mission, right? And then there's the Liquid mission. But, the Liquid mission is sort of a spin-off of my personal mission. Even when you see that going from like LaserPay to Super Migrator, you'd see that in the past 5 years of my crypto career, I've worked in only specific areas, right? Decentralized identity, Hydro, credit and savings, Zen Finance, stablecoins and lending, MakerDAO, and then payments, LaserPay, and then, decentralized finance as well, Liquid. So again, for me, what actually really matters is actually driving up that on-chain adoption. especially for the African continent. And like, why I would say Africa is because on-chain adoption is actually very critical to like, solving issues in like frontier markets. And I mean, even globally. But for us, it's actually very, very important. Imagine from a world where we actually have the fastest growing youth population, but then we are in a world where we are cut out from a global financial, infrastructure, right? We barely have access to like global payments. We don't have insights on like how our data is being used. So no privacy. And we don't have access to like, affordable credit. And when you basically, talk about like economic abundance, you talk about like, economic freedom, you'd sort of like see that like regions that actually have greater economic freedom, they have higher life expectancy. They also have higher GDP growth, less war, less corruption, better environment, higher income of like, their poorest 10%. So we basically want to create sort of like that economic freedom. That's the kind of society we actually all aspire to like create. So if accelerating that on-chain adoption can actually help increase this economic abundance, it means that Africa is actually going to become a place where we actually have higher life expectancy, higher GDP growth. And some of all of these things actually comes with economic freedom. Like I tell people that like I get the best ideas from like, just looking at the problems in Africa. People think those problems are only unique to like Africa, but like, there are several parts of the world that are actually like, facing those same challenges. But building like global products actually gives you a lot of strength. It basically changes how people on the continent actually see you. And then you can get into the continent from like, a place of strength, right? And then you can actually now bring those global solutions to like, Africa to, accelerate that on-chain adoption. So I would say that like, for me, my personal mission is basically driving up that economic, abundance. Because the way I think about it is like, imagine, what we actually do today with less electricity or like, poor internet, right? If we created like this economy where people in Africa can actually like, benefit from what's going on globally in crypto, we make a lot of money. We can then like keep that and, put back into like our society. It can be like, that's your small village, setting up internet or setting up electricity, right? Like imagine what people will actually be able to create when they have access to more resources or when they have access to the internet or when electricity becomes cheaper. So you can do those little things in your individual communities. That's why I'm like, we don't have to wait for the government to come and do this stuff. And that's why I love crypto, because again, crypto is about economic freedom. So that's how I think about it. And my mission actually doesn't just end at like, the internet economy, right? It affects the people that actually like growing up, in the next 10 years in Africa. That's why I'm building global products, gaining global relevance and bringing that, back to like the African continent. I think one thing that Yosef always says that I love is that like crypto needs Africa. We are the ones that have like, those real world problems that actually crypto is best, positioned to like, solve. We just build that globally and like, bring that back into like, the continent.
There's a lot that you shared there that deeply resonates around the fact that we can expect governments to do a whole lot of things, but there's just so much to build. And so having great founders and great entrepreneurs build the many parts of our economic infrastructures that we need or financial systems, we can go so much further that way than just waiting for one institution to go build it for us.
Exactly.
And Njoku, you have actually spent time in Asia, you spent time in Latin America, and you've built in Africa. You as a person are built in Africa, but you've also built things in Africa.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard continent to build and scale things. And I'm curious, building in Africa make it easier or harder to build for Asia or Latin America? How do you kind of encapsulate the trenches of building from Nigeria and building for African users? Who are actually not forgiving users. They're
no.
It's a tough market to crack.
Yeah. That's actually that's really tricky. I think if you can sort of like crack Africa, like there's a very high chance that you'd figure out the rest of the world. There's just a ton of uncertainty, uncertainty in our market, right? I mean, I would say that like, from my experience, one of the reasons why I intentionally decided that like, at least for like, the next 3 years, I'm not going to be building stuff that has to like do with the actual real world. You remember Descent Protocol, that we're going to like ship had to do with like the Nigerian Naira. Was just because of like the regulatory landscape and how fragile it is.
The way I've kind of thought about it and observing you, there's the part of building that interfaces the on-chain economy with like not smart, heavily localized economies. Like there's this crypto and then there's dumb money. For a long period of time, you've built a lot of applications that are making the traditional economy more composable with the on-chain economy. And in that middle place, you're playing with both set of rules. And it is a very challenging place to be, but there's a lot of other founders doing that. What I see you doing with Liquid now is actually offering a whole lot of services to people when they come to the on-chain economy without being tied to the traditional economic system. So yeah, that's of how I've seen you do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like, that I would just say that like it's 10x harder, like building stuff that has to like do with the real world. You're playing a different, ball game entirely. Those people that you're serving, they basically like think differently. Like the psychology is different from the folks that like in the Western world where they basically have like a ton of money. They are basically fine with playing around with just the on-chain economy. It doesn't have to impact their day-to-day life. The folks in Africa, for instance, you're building an on-ramp and off-ramp system. That's $1 that they are trying to convert could be $1 they actually need to like settle payments for either like transport services or like, buy food or like buy airtime data. So that's like, a different complication entirely, right? Like you cannot afford to fail. Your service cannot afford to like fail there. Right. And those kind of like, customers like, think differently versus like on-chain economy. And I would say that like thinking about like these two markets, sort of like in the African market, you see a ton of people actually use your stuff, but that doesn't really translate into like just the on-chain economy alone. You might have very few people, but the volumes would actually be huge as well. So it's totally different psychology and regulations is one. Secondly, the kind of people that are using your products. It's literally their day-to-day lives. And then the on-chain economy is basically people that are sort of trying to actually play around with stuff and see how they can actually make the next 1,000 or like, 1,500x from the product that they're using.
The volume part is an interesting one because, it depends on who you're actually serving. And there are many people who are building for businesses to actually use the on-chain infrastructure to do stuff that the off-chain world doesn't allow them to do. Or, various types of individuals, remote workers, or the retail user that is completely ignored and abandoned by the banking system because they have less money. So yeah, there's a bit more nuance around that. But we've touched upon a lot online. Liquid, it'd be really amazing just to have you explain it a little bit. What is Liquid? What are you trying to do? What does success really look like?
The product Liquid basically ties into the mission where we are trying to democratize access to DeFi yields. Like having access to like high yields and also like safe yields can actually be difficult. In the on-chain economy, right? You have to go from protocol A to protocol B to protocol C and combine different actions. There's like a lot of financial engineering you actually have to like do to get a good yield, right? So what if we could come up with like this new primitive where DeFi experts can actually like curate what we call DeFi strategies that would basically be like a combination of different protocols, different asset class, that ends up to give a certain like, yield percentage. And then the normies, all they just have to do is, invest in those strategies. And those strategies are not like, holding funds or anything. Those strategies are just like, execution paths. The strategy is basically composed of multiple actions. Then we as Liquid, we actually like, bundle all of those executions, right? To now give the users like, the expected yield. Like we have a lot of DeFi experts. We have a lot of protocols, right? But then we have a ton of users. So we're like, is there a world where these DeFi experts could actually leverage their knowledge and we actually make it easy for them to create strategies? And then we expose those strategies to like a ton of users. Those curators of strategies can actually be AI agents. We no longer even need that human interface to curate these yield strategies for users. It could literally be AI agents looking at all of these protocols and saying, okay, this is doing 10% here, this is doing 20% here. If I combine assets A and assets B and like put it into like Aerodrome, provide liquidity, and then use that position to like stake on Moonwell or something, right? We are going to come up with. So the user doesn't need to know all of that, right? AI agents or the DeFi expert in this case knows all of the tiny details of like, the flow of funds. All the user just has to put in $100, put in $1,000, and Liquid as a protocol now executes the set of actions that the agent or the DeFi strategies have curated. We are democratizing yield strategies. We are enabling DeFi experts to monetize their knowledge. And there's something like very interesting that I learned about, right? The people that have like the attention layer, right? Think about like the KOLs. Those guys have worked hard enough to become like, key opinion leaders in like the DeFi space, right? What everybody is pushing for is like, how can we convert our key opinion or like, our stance in the space? How can we like even monetize it in like a way that also benefits the people that follow us? So that's why you see Twitter, right? That's X is paying out creators. So those people have built enough platform that people actually are always looking for what they say next. And X figured out that, look, it's actually going to be good if we incentivize this, monetize this action to keep doing that. So these DeFi strategies or these DeFi chaos, they know a lot about combining protocols. They know a lot about yield strategies. What if we give them a way to like, monetize their knowledge while also benefiting their users? So they basically like, take a percentage of the yield that is being accrued. That's essentially what Liquid is. On all fronts, we are making everyone win and making yields accessible.
And just a quick note on that is you're not talking about just shit coins and meme coins and whatever. You're talking about much more conservative and more secure yield products that are available.
Yes. Like the 10%, like 20% range, the CBBTC, USDC assets class. Yeah.
What is at least in your opinion, what's the expert level that, in this case, these AI agents could reach that you feel could perhaps endanger the potential of the human layer of experts to be able to monetize from this? Because it's a real thing, though. An AI agent has no hours. It can literally be going at all times. As long as it's programmed to do so, it will continue to do so. With a human being, we need to eat, we need to live, we need to do life, and all of that can get in the way. So how do you then differentiate, or is there a specific expert level that if these agents reach, then unfortunately these KOLs can't really do much because they are able to function at a higher capacity than a human would?
To be honest, from our experiments, there's no way anyone is actually going to beat the AI agents. It's like they can come up with an infinite amount of strategies and they can do that consistently if you fed the right data. So what we basically came up with was, what if we enabled like these KOLs to create their own agents specific to them? These KOLs, they already know. Let's say I'm like, an Aerodrome expert, right? I know where to get, the best data on Aerodrome. I come on Liquid, I create my agent, feed it a lot of data, feed it a lot of information, give it prompts that like, look, your role is just like create strategies that tie towards like, the Aerodrome protocol. And it does that for me. So while I'm at sleep, all I just need to do a day or two is like come and check in on the agent and like prompt it or like feed it a lot of data, and that's where the word like, collaborative finance curation platform comes from, because we're like, we need to actually like create a world where these AI agents and like the human curators actually like benefit from each other and everyone to actually win. So that's why when someone asks me what is Liquid, I say Liquid is actually the first collaborative finance curation platform. And so that actually solves the challenge of curators or KOLs thinking that the AI agents are going to like kick them out.
Curious about your intention behind applying for Magma. Obviously, Yosef and the team behind Magma itself had a specific idea of what they were hoping to achieve, but for you to apply for that, particularly applying for the very first one, what was your goal with that? Was there something in particular that you were hoping to receive? And maybe can you share a bit about that experience overall? What was it like to interact with these builders? Because I know a lot of you tend to be very remote. You build in your own little space in your own cocoon.
Yeah. Magma came at like, a crucial time in my life, right? Where I was just, finishing laser pay, I was figuring out, what to do next. I actually got in not expecting like, anything, but when we started the program, it became a safe space for me. I was literally getting out of laser pay, getting out of a depression. I needed to figure out what next to like do. And to be honest, right, like, we are in a remote world, but, I basically do my best work when I have other engineers around me. I do my best work when I sort of have other builders around me, right? So at, that particular point, right, being a part of Magma, after the program, I came out very confident what the next step needs to be. It's okay to actually fail at something. It's okay to build stuff and, it didn't work out. And you're just in a place where you have a ton of support from like fellow builders from you. And the energy level just goes from like 0 to 100. So for me, that was like my Magma experience. I really needed this because it was at the point in my life where I didn't know what to do, right? I was very confused. Like, should I launch this? Should I not launch this? What would happen if I launched that? But then like being at Magma or having like the mentors come like speak to us and having like those, sessions actually like, helps me create a framework for myself, which I basically use to like, decide what next I actually was like, work on. Even as an experienced like, builder, a founder of like, a company in Africa, right? You actually need to be a part of Magma. You actually need to experience that safe space because, our world is full of chaos, right? And sometimes we need to like, disconnect. We just need to like plug out and basically be able to like, see things like, a lot better.
Observing you, Njoku, going through the whole process of shutting down LaserPay, and you had built a ton of popularity in the space. A lot of people were looking up to you, and shutting that down in public. Many people who are in those shoes, would easily basically crumble and feel defeated. And I can imagine you also experience those emotions, right? And to do that and come out of it on the other side after some time and say, I'm going to give this another go. I'm going to build something else and I'm going to make myself vulnerable in front of many other builders and try to build something else because there's something else that wants to be expressed inside of me. That is something that I deeply respected observing. And it takes me back to what you said earlier, which is what would people say? It's something that's very global, but it's also very African as well. We have it in Ethiopia and you do a lot around what would people say? You orient so much around, oh, if I do this, what will so-and-so say? And that is always at the back of your head. And whether you like it or not, you cannot avoid it. Yeah. And it's just been so impressive watching you go through that whole journey.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I think like our parents would be like, don't do this. Your neighbors are doing X, you're doing Y. If you do this, they're going to say this. So growing up, like you just have to like, unlearn it and like be like, okay, I don't really care because at the end of the day, right, like you're the one wearing the shoes. So you just have to like, do what you need to like do without thinking about like, what people would say. So yeah, thanks so much, Joseph, for those words.
I have quick fire questions for you on some things you said earlier, which is building in the open. So can you give us the bull case for building in the open and then the cons of building in the open? If you're a developer, if you're a builder, convince us why is it important and what do we have to gain from building in the open, either open source or sharing and making yourself vulnerable into the landscape?
Yeah, I think I would say for like pros, we are all humans. People are more comfortable listening to like other individuals than a company. Building in public, being so vulnerable about like the whole journey of your company or how you build your company, what it only does is that it actually creates more trust and you have people that actually like your mission would somehow become their mission. And they are now so close to the product that it feels like it's their own and they just become advocates for the product. They become advocates for you. So I would say that's the upside of building in public as a founder. And the builder as a dev, there's nothing as sweet as proof of work. So I would say that a lot of times the job opportunities that I got was just as a result of going to my GitHub repo. I didn't have a resume that had FANG companies or like graduating from the best schools. What I literally had was a GitHub profile that would literally show you all the commits that I made on like specific projects and would show you how well I wrote, XYZ documentation. And that you just pass the first step of the interview, right? Where they're like, okay, this person, has shown that they can actually do this thing, right? Your work now speaks for you, right? Like people would relate to you more, if you actually put out your stuff. Like I said, the internet is a gold mine, right? Not just for information. You're on X, you're connecting to millions of people. People are watching you. So you can be doing stuff and you'd see that some guy will just speak interest in what you're doing. And that thing that you actually just shipped as a side project is literally solving a problem that they are facing. That's literally how you get that next job. I always told people that they should actually be vocal about whatever they are building. But with every pro comes a con.
Yeah.
There's
Tell
the
us the
bad
other
side
side.
of it. The other day I said on my tweet that being in Pivotal is sort of like, shameful, right? When things are not working your way, moments when you're doing sort of like a live product demo and some API fails, you feel like the world is, crumbling on top of your head. There's actually that part that like you actually ashamed, you're actually embarrassed by your stuff not working out or basically failing, right? And then there's also the other parts that it can put you on an unnecessary pressure where you've sort of created this standard and now you have to show up every day and live up to that standard that you've set. It can be very depressing. And people who forget that we are all humans and that sometimes we can slack and stuff, right? They would actually forget that. And when things actually go wrong, they'll just compound on you. That's like the bad side of being in public. You basically set yourself up. So there are now two ways I think about it, right? One, which is like you either use that as motivation to actually like, put in more work, go and learn more about like whatever you're building and become a better version of yourself, or you let that eat you up. So I would say that like, if you look at the pros and the cons, right, and you see that the cons can actually be a source of strength, I would say that like there are no downsides, right, with like, building in public.
Yeah.
I think in as much as that's a thing that a lot of people just have in general, I think the space we're in is a bit worse in terms of not being very forgiving. A lot of people tend to assume that you can't fail, and failing can be seen in different forms. Or if perhaps you do pivot, like how you said, they considered he failed. And then some people tend to just refuse to interact with anything that a person has built since, the pivot that they've done, or since changing lanes, or since creating a new project. It's not really a question. I think it's just more to say we tend to forget that human element. We say it often, especially on this episode, that there's a human layer. There's a person behind the project that is doing the building. So it's always important, I think, for us to relate with that a bit more. The question is,
yeah,
if there are specific elements of advice you can give to builders, becoming founders, or just people who are starting out in the space, maybe some things that you would like to have done differently that you feel like maybe could have worked better. Of course, some things could work the same way for other people as well if they do it in whatever form. But from a personal perspective, what are these little nuggets of advice that you can give for people who are trying to build this new space for themselves as well?
Yeah, I think just keep it short and simple. I would say that like, be very intentional about what you want and put in the work. Work 100x harder. Put in more hours, especially if you're young, right? It's all about how much do you want something. You can get whatever you want. So it's just about how much you actually want it. So I would say put in a lot of intentionality in your work, sustain relationships. As young people, we tend to forget that and want to like burn every relationship to the ground. But we need to remember that in as much as we work hard, there is always that concept of like who is speaking on your behalf. And we all need that one person that would speak on our behalf and would go open doors for us. And then that's when hard work will now take over, right? I think for me, I had that, at Zen Finance, Ugo, down to like, Yele, and now I think Yosef. So I would say that like nurture and like, create relationships. You spend a lot of hours on your computer. Just go outside, meet people, talk to people, right? Just, experience like the world from other people's views, right? And respect that and be very, very intentional about your work. Do great work, not good work. Don't ever settle for good work. You do great work. I tell hackathon founders like, it's a hackathon. Yes, fine and good, but because it's a hackathon doesn't mean you should actually build products with shitty UI, right? Like build the products in such a way that like people globally, anywhere in the world can actually use it. Build it like people are going to be paying for it. don't build crappy stuff. Good is not enough anymore. Right? You're in a world where we have a lot of talent. You're competing with the best of the best. You actually have to build great stuff and don't ever settle for less.
Amazing. So many gold mines there.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think just in closing, so what's next now for you, for Supermigrate and Liquid and everything else that you're building? I know that you tend to be quite heavy on the pulse of what's happening within the cultural element of the space. Are there things in particular that we can look forward to, that you're working towards, that you are open to sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say look out for my AI agents, right? The goal is basically very simple, right? We want to make yields accessible, and that's what I'm spending my time doing, right? Thinking about how we can make DeFi more collaborative, and we can also, make it fun again. So yeah, that's what everyone should look out for.
Okay. Any closing words you'd like to share, Yosef? Or final question?
Yeah, this has been such a great conversation, Njoku. Thanks for sharing all your perspectives and lessons very openly. I hope others can take bits and pieces out of it, and I'm excited to use Liquid. So looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. Everyone needs to use Liquid. Yeah. Thank you so
needs
much.
to use Liquid. Yeah. Thank you again so much for gracing us with your insights and, just sharing a bit more about yourself. I know that it tends to happen too often that people forget the humanity behind these fun projects that we're building. I'm sure I speak for a lot of listeners here when I say yours will forever be an inspiring story. I think more so because it was so public and it shows, exactly what's possible in this fast moving zeitgeist, because so many things can change so quickly. So thank you to everyone for listening, and a reminder to follow Borderless AF on X or Twitter, and subscribe to the newsletter on borderless.africa. I will leave Njoku's socials and handles in the description, so you can definitely follow him and everything that he is doing moving forward, so you don't miss out on all the alpha and the AI agents that he's building. That is all from me. Until the next one, keep building.